I can't stress enough how important I think this is to be a modern day executive, just period. How do you actually listen to someone in a way that allows you to respond in a meaningful way?
When you're working with a group in particular, what you want is for everybody to feel like they've been heard, but also that they feel a little bit of a win in whatever the outcome is, that there isn't anybody that feels like their point of view was not considered in the context of the outcome. The other piece that I think really is important is a high degree of diplomacy, because when you're trying to ensure that everybody feels like they've won, it's almost a little bit of brokering that goes on. You know, you're running between people and merchandising some of what you've been hearing, but in a way that you know will be palatable to them. And then in some cases, selling in the concept in a way that makes them feel as if they've prevailed or that their point of view was equally considered. And I think that it's a special skill set to both listen, but then lead to the outcome. And then everybody feels like they've won.
Welcome to Marketing Trends. This is your host, Jeremy Bergeron. Today, we're joined by Carrie Grapenthin, Chief Marketing Officer at Lincoln International. And if you don't know, by the end of this conversation, you will know. Carrie has over 2 decades of experience in brand building and strategic communications, which really fuels her wisdom across diverse sectors. Carrie has masterfully shaped brand perceptions and definitely driven growth within professional and financial services. So join us today as we delve into her insights on driving change, thought leadership, fostering innovation in the very competitive world of investment banking.
Thanks, Jeremy. I'm thrilled to be here. I appreciate the invite.
Yes, I'm super excited. I thought there was an interview you did like a few years back, but it sounds like it's been even a bit longer since you've come from behind the marketing curtain to be on a show. So welcome. We're super excited.
Thank you.
These are the conversations, you know, it's not, we aim to get into these conversations because though we of course love to speak with executives that are, you know, on the circuit doing the podcast tour and they all have stuff to share, it's awesome. But when we can get someone like you who doesn't make it a very common thing to go out and do a bunch of interviews, it brings to the surface some interesting things, at least in the past. And so we're super stoked. I want to dive into something that we talked about on the prep a little bit before we press record. And I think it's interesting because it really fits into you as an executive and you have a very interesting background. Talk about just right off the jump, talk about your dive into comms and your perspective in that world and how that shaped you to now become the CMO at Lincoln. Your content is at the heart of what you do. It connects your company to others, teaches them, guides them, and inspires them. But creating, managing, and accelerating content creation is often chaotic and difficult. Empower your content teams with Brightspot Content Management System, made specifically for marketers and corporate communications leaders. No more waiting for a developer to have to piece things together. Put the power to create and deliver digital experiences into the hands of your marketers with a comprehensive suite of ready-to-use tools and functionality. Bring a bright spot to your tech stack with the Brightspot Content Management System. Visit brightspot.com/marketing trends today.
Yeah, great question. I think I'm a little unconventional when it comes to a CMO because so much of my career has been rooted in communications. I was a PR major in college and always was passionate about words. I was an English major as well and took a few assessments to determine what that path might be. And it seemed like I needed to go in the direction of being persuasive, but in what capacity? And ultimately chose PR and Corp Comm as that spot where I could be both influential, but also focus on a mastery of the message and ensure that whatever it is that a company was saying reflected what the audience, you know, both wanted to hear, but also had the potential to motivate their behaviors. And so, you know, that idea about what needs to be said has really been the central element of my career ever since. It sits in the middle of, you know, whatever the marketing initiative might be or the visibility that we might create around an executive and what his or her brand might look like in the marketplace. It's always distilled down to the what needs to be said that has been a central element. And, you know, being in PR has always added a level of risk mitigation to the way that I think. And, you know, I think that that's particularly important when you're crafting messages, is not only to think about what the audience wants to hear, but also be cautious around perhaps what they don't want to hear. So it's been a really fun ride having that as the foundation of my career.
So there was this, at some point in the career journey of Carrie, you got bit by the marketing bug, and there's something that shifted there, because you could have certainly stayed in comms and you did achieve success there, but then there was a shift into marketing. What was it? Was it a project? Was it just an experience? Was it just something that always grabbed your attention? Take us back to that moment. What was going on in Carrie's brain and experience then?
Yeah, such a fun time to think about. I actually had lunch with my very first boss yesterday and was reflecting on some of these points. So my first job was at a global PR agency, and I loved it. I don't think that there's a better place for a young person to start. They get so much exposure to all different types of communication work, though I was hired in 2000 to do employee communications consulting, which at the time was a pretty novel concept. I think companies were just starting to come around to the fact that you could use communications to drive engagement and then ultimately drive business performance. And I was super hot on that topic. I thought it was so neat. It was so heavy on comms. It stripped out some of the media relations dimension of PR, which wasn't always my favorite thing to do. And I just was thrilled every day to be working on challenges of, whether it's executive comms inside of the organization or changing perceptions about, what it means to work at a certain company by making an employee feel a sense of pride for his or her job. It just was fascinating. But I got to a point too where I was a little concerned that I was becoming pigeonholed, and I wasn't sure that I wanted to build an entire career rooted in internal communications, despite my affinity for it. And so I always loved being in school, like a giant nerd. And so I started to look at continuing my education and found a program at Northwestern centered in integrated marketing communications. And I thought it would be a really great way to explore, all of the strategies and distribution methods and the role of ensuring that message, back to comms, is consistent across all of those platforms. And really enjoyed that program, which I completed while I was working, and just discovered after the fact that I had an opportunity to take that knowledge and perhaps broaden my horizons a little bit. And I did. I left that agency, but just continue to look on it so fondly and that time. And as I said, the internal comms piece sticks with you. I think those things you learn early on endure.
Oh, that's amazing. And I love that you also seem to have this continual ability. You want to keep learning and keep, what else is happening out there. On that note, what are some of the things that you're paying attention to now, learning about now in your role, having been there now almost 7 years?
Really good question. And as I said, I enjoy any occasion to learn something new. I think there's a couple paths. Professionally speaking, I get kind of excited about research. And so I know, going to Google to do some desktop research sounds a little vintage, but, I was the person that was popping into the library all the time just to find those reference materials. And I think it's the lens that, I look through that helps me learn something distinct or even challenge myself about it. And so research in any form, whether it's, client research that we might be doing in a really broad capacity or even in a more anecdotal way, is always informing some of the stuff that we're doing, and it helps me to learn more about how the sentiment might be shifting, which it definitely has been over the last couple of years, where the deal-making environment has been a bit muted. But personally speaking, I've had an affinity that started for executive coaching and just becoming a really good listener to people as they articulate, what they'd like to achieve, what they believe others perceive of them, and how they can perhaps bridge that gap, or perhaps, set some goals for themselves to achieve something even greater for themselves. Helping has always been an important aspect of my life. And so, I think that some of those listening skills are just things that do take some training and some development, and asking the right questions to lead an individual to the outcome they want. And so I've been doing a lot of reading and researching in that regard too, to see how I can bring those skills to work, in the spirit of knowing more frequently how our execs' minds are shifting day to day, and a CEO in particular and his brand in the market, or how members of my team might be thinking about their own development, and how I can help lead them to an outcome that's satisfactory for them without giving them answers or making them feel like they don't have control of their own destiny. And so those are a couple things that I've been digging into lately.
I love it. And you're saying some of my favorite things, and one of my favorite things you said is listening. And when I find that some of the most interesting executives, when you kind of suss through their superpowers, listening, the art of listening seems to be something that I've really picked up on the past, 500 interviews. There's really been a core group of folks that actually bring it up. And I think many of them do it well and don't talk about it, but I think it's so important. I'm curious to double click on that just with you. Like, look, you have a lot of responsibility. I believe one of the most utility executive leaders is the CMO, is the one that leads marketing, especially in 2024. So when you think of just listening, like when you're just listening, like, is there something that you do when you're listening? Because I feel like depending on who, again, you're listening to, and that may change, but I feel like there's something there in how you listen, or is there something that you're doing, or you're telling yourself something, how do you actually listen to someone in a way that allows you to respond in a meaningful way?
That's a great question. I think fundamentally, having a relationship with the person that you're listening to is helpful, because you can come at the dialogue a little bit more with an understanding of the motivations that might be driving what they're saying. And with that knowledge, I'm somebody who has to step away and internalize quite a bit what I've heard. And I think I have a good ability to do that as if it my sort of washing machine inside of me, where all of these inputs from a variety of places agitate like a washing machine would, and you pull out something clean. I always think the key is, when you're working with a group in particular, and ours is an organization where, we like to have a lot of voices on a number of topics. What you want is for everybody to feel like they've been heard, but also that they feel a little bit of a win in whatever the outcome is, that there isn't anybody that feels like that their point of view was not considered in the context of the outcome. The other thing, it's funny how you ask about listening. I really do think it's an important skill. The other piece that I think, I've always felt I'm good at, and to your point about utility player, it really is important, is a high degree of diplomacy. Because when you're trying to ensure that everybody feels like they've won, it's almost a little bit of brokering that goes on, right? And in the relationship development, as I said, but you're running between people and merchandising some of what you've been hearing, but in a way that will be palatable to them. And then, in some cases, selling in the concept in a way that makes them feel as if they've prevailed, or that their point of view was equally considered. And really, in the organization that I'm in, everybody's point of view is equally considered. And I think that it's a special skill set to both listen, but then sort of lead to the outcome. And then, as I said, everybody feels like they've won.
I can't stress enough how important I think this is to be a modern day executive, just period. I have some dear close friends that have Fortune 100, marketing exec experience. And, a lot of the things that aren't talked about is that sometimes there can be a lot of, there can be pressure, there can be competition amongst leaders, there can be, behind the back, try to push this person out. It can be a full contact sport, just being an executive. And especially when you're playing at the level you're playing at, Carrie, what impresses me is you've been there almost 7 years. You've been in marketing leadership for most of that, if not all that time, right?
Correct.
So you already know, you're already past the typical tenure of marketing leaders. In fact, a core majority of the folks I've interviewed the past few years are no longer at those businesses, right? And so I'm impressed with your ability to stay in the pocket, because I know that can't be easy, because you're having to build relationships with a lot of people, including your teams and including listening to your customer. And like there's so much, I think, that you have to have a capacity for in your role to be able to stay grounded, focused, and continue to show the scoreboard of like win after win after win, because you would not be in that seat if you weren't continually winning. So it says a lot about your ability to play with your peers, build trust across the aisle. And I'm curious what that's meant for you, because again, you're entering into that status where a lot of CMOs a lot of them don't get to be somewhere for that long.
So I actually have been fortunate at the company that I'm at, and at prior organizations as well, in that I've tried to break the mold a little bit about what leadership thinks a CMO can do. And perhaps because of this, skill set that I bring, that's perhaps a little different than other marketers. And because of that, I've had a lot more variety in the scope of the role and have the opportunity to make an impact in different ways beyond what the traditional definition of marketing is. So, I think CMOs sometimes have a shorter tenure in their organizations because we're all naturally interested in change. We want to drive something meaningful. We'd like to see the results of that. We like to be creative, I would think. And sometimes it can feel like the opportunities to do that become a little less frequent when you've built large teams, you're operationalizing the strategy, et cetera. And so at least in my organization, I've been able to encourage some new ways of thinking beyond marketing, including introducing, a net promoter score study to understand, more deeply market perceptions, but specifically how the experience of working with Lincoln is, which is a really substantive piece of research that is meaningful to the business and to the strategy. And then I serve on the firm's strategy committee. I think because of this listening and this diplomacy and this ability to construct a compelling narrative and message, the firm's strategy was really great to begin with, but we hadn't articulated it in a way that created meaning for employees, in a way that we could structure our initiatives and investments around, in a way that we could create guardrails that help with decision making with respect to spend or not doing things, which I think is equally important when you talk about strategy. So I've been able to flex a lot of my skills beyond what some might expect the CMO to do, and excited to have those occasions to do work that's a little outside the scope or outside the sandbox, if you will, of a CMO. It's what keeps me in an organization.
Do you feel like there's a particular executive on the ELT that you feel like in these days you need to be building a strong relationship with, where maybe 4 or 5 years ago that wasn't the case, right? I've talked to some folks where they bring their CFO into meetings when they go hear from agencies, or they're bringing their operations executive along. So I'm curious if there's been a role in your time now that's kind of bubbled up as like, maybe it's the CTO or the tech role, but for you, like, is there a role where you're like, this is important that we're on the same page now more than in the past?
Such a great question. I've been so lucky to have such strong relationships with other leaders of functional groups in organizations, and it kind of varies a bit based on whatever the need is. And I think if you've got even a bit of a friendship there to start, you're sharing ideas, but everybody's coming to the fore at a point where you particularly need them. So for example, when it comes to employee engagement and all of those topics, the relationship that I have with the chief talent officer is particularly strong. We're always thinking about both the inside and outside dimension of a program and ensuring that we're authentic in what we're saying internally, as well as, the promise that we put out in the marketplace. I've been in other organizations where my relationship with the general counsel is particularly tight because we may have been dealing with some unfortunate or adverse issues within the business, where mitigating the message in the press isn't particularly important. And so that becomes a really good strategic duo. And the CFO relationship's very important, particularly in an organization where you're still building a bit how you want to structure and report on spend, whether it's relationship development type spend, which is an important part of our business, or broad brand building spend, and strategizing through the right way to articulate back to the organization how the dollars are being utilized so that we can make adjustments as necessary is another perhaps unlikely but really critical relationship.
Wow. I love this. Let's double click into just Lincoln International, like as a brand, like talk for audience who doesn't know who they are. I wasn't super familiar myself, and then started to look at like this global footprint, this very big brand that has to do a lot of things really well, and in a very complex market. It's global reach, but it's also personalized advisory. And Lincoln International is like this leading investment firm, clearly. So talk about the business, and then what stage and phase is the business in now? What's happening at Lincoln International?
Lincoln International is a global investment banking advisory firm. We're in more than 15 countries around the world. We're one of these brands that's I would say a challenger brand. about 1,000 employees. We have 4 core services. The principal service that we've offered since the firm was founded in 1996 is merger and acquisition advisory. So this is working with either private equity or entrepreneurs or management teams to consider, the potential sale of their business to the next owner or a large investment from an outside source in order to fuel the next phase of growth. It's an awesome concept because our audience varies quite a bit. And I like the distinction between audience types because, private equity as a buyer of our services is quite a sophisticated user of an investment bank. Whereas an entrepreneur who has built a business over his or her life, might not have a succession plan. They're only going to go through this kind of process once, and you really want it to be important and meaningful for them. But they're in more of an educational stage, perhaps, on how to work through an M&A deal. So M&A is one of the principal services that we offer. That we've got a nice complement of services around that, from private funds advisory, which is a group that works on sort of our alternative solutions to an exit, to a sale of a company. A capital advisory group that's working on the financing aspects of getting a deal done, and then evaluations and opinions group, which is actually working very closely with the businesses themselves to help identify on a quarterly basis the present value of their business based on performance and a variety of other factors. And we really talk about that as kind of a continuum of need, those services for private equity in particular, because they are naturally working across their portfolio of companies, thinking of some of those services that might be utilized depending upon where their portfolio company is in its own life cycle. So it's a very substantive place to work vis-a-vis content, because we have what I think is really interesting service offering that provides to me more opportunities to learn all the time, because I wasn't in financial services previously. And so I've really, I think, leveled up my acumen on financial services topics. But then we also have core industry groups, and that gives members of my team and me an opportunity to get to know, broadly trends in healthcare that are impacting M&A, or industrials, or business services, or consumer, which I, as a consumer myself, I tend to have a real draw to what's going on in our consumer business. But, that creates such rich field for learning and supporting the business with thought leadership, et cetera. So the business is growing quite a bit. We had a phenomenal couple of years, as many did, post-COVID. And we are entering new markets and doing a lot of great hiring at the managing director level to drive the next phase of growth. And it's a firm with really big ambitions, and I'm excited to be a part of it.
You talked about the challenger brand, which I think is so interesting. I think an advantage of being a challenger brand is often, this greater agility compared to some of these larger firms. Can you think of examples or anything specific on how Lincoln International has been able to move quickly to capitalize on new opportunities or adapt to market changes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that our CEO often talks about is that the firm, having been founded by 4 guys back in 96, has always been pretty scrappy and pursuing certain opportunities when perhaps others might have backed off a bit. And that has proven to be really successful for them. And even in times of market dislocation, making certain investments in order to be prepared for a rebound has positioned the firm really well. And I've been around long enough to really appreciate what they mean by that. You have to be somewhere at least, 6-7 years to work through some economic cycles and actually see the strategy in action, and then have an appreciation for, wow, they were right, I think when it comes to agility, because of the firm's scale, we're in a position to, work as really tight, integrated, often cross-border teams to devise solutions that are going to be meaningful for the business broadly. And then we are really good, in my opinion, at driving adoption of some of the changes that we implement in the organization, which is really, I think, a great side effect, if you will, of our current size, because we're still in a position to have one-to-one or small group conversations. And the word of mouth in our organization is quite good too, because of our strong culture. When I think of an example of where my team has been particularly agile, I look to COVID, if you can bring up that word. But the pandemic, we had just reintroduced the brand to the marketplace at the end of 2018, and one of the essential elements of our brand essence is around this idea of thought leadership and demonstrating perspective. And we were working on starting up a content marketing program. And that was new for the organization and something that, takes a good bit of time to find ambassadors in the organization, if you will, who will participate in the process and then go tell a friend, if you will. And so the pandemic came around and, everybody experienced the same thing around the world, right? We all went home, and for at least, 2, 3, 4 weeks, we were all in the same boat. And from a deal-making perspective, everybody kind of put their pencils down with this uncertainty that was going on. But the other aspect of our brand that is so important is about relationships, and it's called real connection in our essence. And it became so important that our bankers had a reason to contact. And, beyond, the how are you doing? Is your family safe? Some of these things that, you connected on initially, our bankers were really interested in connecting on what this could mean for M&A. And in a lot of ways by industry or by product, as I mentioned earlier. And so, while we'd been a little bit slow to start on the content marketing program, initially the pandemic catalyzed this program in a way that was so helpful to us over the long term, because a number of bankers participated in the process of working with our outside writers. And over about an 8-week period, we generated about 50 pieces of content to support them. And whether it was, direct outreach to, a small audience, or from my team's perspective, broadly promoting some of this thinking around what the pandemic was doing to the supply chain and how that would impact consumer products, for example, or what the pandemic was doing to healthcare and what that might foretell, in M&A in the healthcare sector. And all of that was so important for us operationally, because we ended up with, all of these great people who were in the organization appreciating how simple it could be to work with the team and work with the writers and to get something out in the market quickly. And that's the critical piece of what my team does. We're productizing what sits in the minds of these bankers. They're brilliant people, but unless you're with them in the room at the, conference or what have you, we need to find a way to strip that out of their minds and put it into the hands of our targets. And so the pandemic itself was an occasion where a very lean team worked very hard to support the business.
So you started the content machine, essentially. Was that in the pandemic? Is that what it's kind of, let's kick this thing off?
We started actually in earnest in 2019. I think we had some good quick wins working with a number of bankers and creating, infographics about trends in cybersecurity or, ed tech or whatever the case may be, and really getting some nice inbounds off the back of that. I think it was a little unique in our sector to present thought leadership in the way that we were at the time. But it still was gaining traction, and the market was really robust. And, it's a professional services firm, and we want our bankers to be with their clients. That's where they should be focused. And so when they're busy, it's great for everyone. It just happened that we came upon a period where suddenly everyone paused, and we capitalized on that a little bit and, did a lot of internal marketing to try and generate interest in the program that was already there for them to participate in. They just hadn't done it yet. And once the pandemic came, they did, and then they became believers.
Out of all the different kind of types of content plays, is there like an emerging trend that you think is going to have the biggest impact on financial services in terms of content?
In financial services, there's a gamut of content that companies produce. And, there's a real desire to see just market activity, trends, et cetera. One of the mandates that we have as a group when we're giving, input to our teams on creating content like that is that we put a promise out in the market that we're going to deliver some perspective. And so if we're going to package up in partnership with them, readily available third-party research, what we need to do is put our voice around what it's telling us, not just the packaging up of this material. And I find that a lot of companies in the sector focus more on the packaging and not on the message. And I think that that's where Lincoln stands out quite a bit. It's very simple, and it goes back to an earlier point about AI, that it could homogenize communications. It could homogenize content if, you're only focusing on that and even the bells and whistles on how it's presented and not necessarily applying a point of view to what the data says.
So, Carrie, can you describe a content campaign or strategy that was particularly innovative or risky? And then any lessons learned from that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's a little hybrid content PR. When I joined the firm, the Valuations and Opinions group had just introduced an index that they were going to publish on a quarterly basis. And it took me a little while to track with what the index communicated, but ultimately the team was sitting on a giant proprietary database from all the work that they do. And they decided to identify a way to aggregate the data and share it in a confidential way to provide trends and insights into the performance of the private markets, which is proving since the time that, we launched it both with a PR partner, but then also in generating articles and other things to be a gold mine for Lincoln in terms of its positioning us as a leading voice on what's going on across the private market spectrum. And so what I wouldn't characterize it as risky necessarily, but the story goes that at the time that we all, decided to introduce this index, the inflection point was that the CIO had been asking the valuations team, if he could dump all this data off of the servers because it was taking up so much room. And our chairman actually said, was there anything we could be doing with that data? Now, that's a marketer's dream, is to say, what can we do with all this data, right? Anybody that wants to develop content is looking for something like that. And in our case, it's proprietary to us. And the index itself has proven to be so meaningful for the brand insofar that, clients are now leveraging so much of the data in their own communications, and then top tier media, are referring to the firm as the leading voice and the go-to resource for private market insights, which is just completely in the sweet spot of our vision. We want to be the best investment banking advisory firm in the private capital markets, and we're getting the credentialization from the likes of Bloomberg. So that has been a really brand beneficial tool for us. And the spokespeople in that group are just, on the speaking circuit, and highly relied upon for the things that they have to share about what that data tells us. It's really great.
I'm curious about some of the things you pay attention to in terms of metrics. You've been successful in the role. So there's definitely you're good at developing leaders, you're good at communicating with your team, you're good at culture, you're good at driving change, you're good at driving results. Curious if there's any nuance to that for you.
I had a boss once use a great analogy that I continue to proliferate with teams and colleagues too, as we talk about the role of my team compared to perhaps the banker who is, face to face with the client. The analogy that I found very useful was that, the role of marketing, if you analogize it to a car company, the role of marketing is to get the person to the lot. But the role of the banker is to sell the car. And so it has to be a true partnership. But there's so many touch points along the way, whether it's a team like mine creating a perception, from nowhere about what they might experience and learn or receive as a customer once they get to the lot. But it's the banker who's going to reinforce any of that messaging, but then also forge a trusted relationship in the context of, perhaps becoming engaged on a deal or otherwise. And so that analogy, I think, has been really important, even as I've been inside the organization and evangelize that partnership and the importance of working together, and that there's no single thing that the marketing organization is going to do that's just going to put a revenue number on the board, that it is a team of people working together to deliver against that brand promise that's going to drive the results that we need. And I'll often stand up at, global meetings with an audience of 850 or what have you and say, here's a range of activities that we've been doing to help, in the same analogy vein, get the people to the lot. But it comes down to you, the banker, the individual, the advisor, to help ensure that it's a full circle brand experience that aligns with the promise that we've made in the market. And I tell them they are the single most important marketers. They are the single most active activity that we have that is going to help drive home, in the car analogy again, I guess, the outcome that we all want to see. So another, we did something, I think, clutter busting a couple years ago. And I do think, I do think it's important, even in a highly regulated business like investment banking, that you try and think creatively. It's what marketers like to do, but you also try and stretch a little bit and do something that is perceived out of the box. And Lincoln's an organization that's really supportive of trying some of these things. And we did something pretty cool a couple years ago. We did advertising inside of O'Hare Airport, really as a brand awareness play. It was just to try and grow awareness around the name Lincoln International and our mark and create some context for those 4 core services that we provide. And it was so great for building pride. And that's something that's hard to measure. But it was also a period, it was 2022, also a period where people were getting back into travel. People were excited to be, passing through airports and reconnecting again. The war for talent was on. We were heavily recruiting. And we were having these occasions where candidates would come through Chicago for an interview and then pass our ad at O'Hare on their way back to their flight, which would sort of, put a little wind at the backs. It was an incredible campaign. Where we did a little light research on awareness pre and post, but ultimately the way that our people felt, seeing how formidable the organization had come, that the brand was out there in such a public way, it had such a lift on the vibe and the feel inside our 4 walls that, you can't really bottle that up and say what the outcome was, but you could feel it. And sometimes anecdotal metrics can be the best.
I love it. There's some of those intangibles that are just, are like core magic to the brand and magic to the success. And like, you might not be able to put a number or quantify that experience, but it impacts internal folks and external folks. So cool. So as we think about the future, right? The future of kind of where Carrie's heading as a marketing leader, where Lincoln's heading as this really interesting financial service advisory firm with a global footprint. What do you see coming down the pipeline for you as a leader and an executive, and also for the brand?
I think we have real opportunity to consider AI in the context of how we do what we do, while remaining true to our own voice and ensuring, as I said, that whatever we create feels really custom to the audience and something that only Lincoln could possibly say. I think storytelling and creating a way for somebody to be engaged in content, not because it's sort of need to know, but because they'd like to know. And, embedding some creativity into how we do that, again, in a way that is appropriate for our sector, is the kind of thing that's going to continue to keep Lincoln at the forefront, but also, any company stand out from its peers.
I love, like, because you're going back to your comms experience, which is like, don't lose the brand voice, like don't lose who we are, because that can be diluted sometimes with AI and some of these tools. You might get an acceleration of a strategy or a really cool idea. And all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, we lost our voice. And so you, again, as that kind of with that comms background, that comms foundation, keeping it ever at the forefront, right? That like, we got to make sure that what we're saying and how we're saying it is still core to our voice. That's a good point.
Right.
All right, let's do some fun lightning round questions. We've got Carrie Grapenthin, Chief Marketing Officer for Lincoln International, in the virtual studio. Let's go. You ready, Carrie?
I'm ready.
Okay. What is the best way to start a day as a marketer?
Read the headlines.
Apple or Android, and why?
Apple, and this sounds trite, but I like the blue text bubbles and knowing that I can like or thumbs up or what have you a text without getting that annoying next message that says, whenever there's an Android user in the mix, it throws the whole thing off, in my opinion, and no offense to Android users.
That's so funny. What's one marketing podcast besides ours that you regularly listen to?
I don't have one. Isn't this terrible?
That's
yours,
no, not at all.
Right?
Just mine could be the only one. I'm cool with that.
Yeah.
What's the most challenging demographic to market to?
I think in our business, the most challenging demographic is the affluent demographic. These are people who make good money and can probably activate whatever their desires are. And so it's a responsibility of ours to come up with an experience that feels unique to them or something that they otherwise wouldn't construct for themselves. And I think we've had a ton of success doing things like that. The one that I loved, we did pre-election. It was COVID, so we had a Zoom point counterpoint debate between Chris Christie and Rahm Emanuel, who were amazing, and clients, came to this in droves just to hear some perspective on the upcoming election and, importantly, what the outcome might mean to deal making. It was awesome.
I love that. How do you keep your team motivated under tight deadlines?
I'm a big proponent of context. And I think if the team has the longer view on the work that they're doing and the potential of even that small task that they might be responsible for and in the big picture, it helps to drive everybody forward, and it helps to inspire them a little bit about what they're doing.
LinkedIn or Twitter for professional networking?
LinkedIn, definitely.
LinkedIn. I knew you were going to say that. I had a feeling like she's going to say LinkedIn. What's your biggest marketing prediction for the next year?
I think that storytelling and those who continue to have a unique voice on whatever the topic is are the people that will prevail.
Let's go. That's my favorite. Storytelling for the win. I love it. What can derail a marketing plan?
The economy.
Full stop. Mic drop. Okay. Thank you, Carrie. This was an exceptional conversation. I mean, this is again like one of those moments where like you can go very broad and cover lots of ground. Your comms background's so interesting. Married now with being the marketing leader at Lincoln International. I know that you had my head is turning now on where is this industry going? Where is Lincoln going? Shout out to you. Shout out to the whole team there at Lincoln International. And thank you so much for being on Marketing Trends.
Thank you for having me. It was super fun.
Brightspot Content Management System enables marketers to launch in just 100 days. It efficiently manages marketing campaigns or updates investors on your corporate site, handling it all seamlessly. With over 100 plus different content types and templates, marketers can deliver a customized, relevant experience to your audience. Additionally, integrate your current marketing automations platform and access instant analytics and SEO recommendations directly from your Brightspot content management system, simplifying tool management. Discover more at brightspot.com/marketing trends.